Hello and welcome to Lutherans Alive. My name is Gregory Held, and this is the program that brings you the story of Lutheran Christians and their ministries in southwestern Pennsylvania. Many Lutherans who make their way around southwestern Pennsylvania, and probably even a wider circle than that, have heard of Camp Lutherland in Prospect, PA, between Lake Moraine and Butler, just north of the Pittsburgh area. And with us today, our director of the camp, Randy Gullickson. Pastor Gullickson, welcome.
Good to be here, Greg.
Good to have you with us. And Mr. Frank Baker. Frank's a member of St. John's Katanning Lutheran Church, a longtime supporter of Camp Lutherland as well. And we're here today to talk about a relatively new idea and a developing project that's taking place at camp. Gentlemen, thanks very much for coming in today and being willing to help us tell the story.
Thank you for inviting us to come and share. Thank you.
You're welcome. We don't always have a show and tell in front of us, but today we do. On the table before us is a mock-up of a building, an edifice, if you will, that will be completed, we anticipate, in the near future at Lutherland. Who would like to be the first to describe to us or to name what this edifice is, so that we can begin to tell the story?
Well, maybe we go back just a little bit and tell a little bit about the beginning of this. Would this be a good time to do that? Pastor Randy and I served on the board of Lutheran Affiliated Services, which is now Lutheran Senior Care, for some years. And we were seated at the same table one time, and we've had a long association and passion for the work of Lutherland. And I said to Randy, I said, any special need? I said, my wife, Mary, and I would be very glad to get involved if there's a special project. And Randy's never without ideas, I've learned that. And so he needed a little time to think about it and came up with this rather unique design. And he's worked long and hard on it, and I think it's very, very creative. And it fills a special need, as Randy told us, for both a music and a worship center. While there's been worship part of Camp Lutherland for years, I've never really had an indoor chapel as such, and a very strong music program. And I'd like him to say a little bit about the present music program and the possibilities for the future, because as soon as this started developing, the ideas just started spewing forth as to other things that this could be used for. And I might just say that Mary and I have, we've always tried to be wise investors, not only of our money, but time and talent. And we see no better place to invest than in Camp Lutherland and the young people in the future, because it's been shown time and time again that the church camp experience has been very seminal in faith development and in raising up leaders for the church, many of whom gone into ministry. But with that said, Randy, if you'd tell us a little bit about what your thought process was as we formulated this.
Well, this turns out to be a very unusual building for the United States of America. It started for me as I walked through a retreat center in Medora, North Dakota one fall some years ago, and saw this very interesting little residence that had a curved eave line. And I'm kind of a person who's interested in architecture and how things go together, so I spent a little time looking at this place, and I was completely intrigued by the idea of having rafter tails that would describe a curve rather than a straight line. And so I started tinkering with that idea and tried to figure out how you could do that on all sides of a building, which didn't turn out to be possible, but I ended up with this framework that allows for a curved roof line. The fun of it is that the central supporting structure is a pinwheel of sorts, and that the rafters all begin at the flat on the top, and then they're resting on poles of various heights, so that you get a parabolic curve at the eave line, which creates a very interesting space on the inside. And it took quite a long time to find a structural engineer who would take this on and figure it all out. And it turned out that this particular roof structure was actually invented in Europe in the 1700s, and it's called a reciprocal frame. Took a long time to sort that out, but once we got it done, it turned out that the calculations didn't need to be done on a computer at all. It was an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with a series of equations, and our structural engineer in North Carolina was able to put that all together. And as a result of that, then we were able to go ahead and put together a design that allows for this. The building has offset walls. There's a step in each wall, and it's as if there were 4 squares all turned slightly counterclockwise to offset the walls. And so it's an interesting shape, and combined with the curved roof, it's going to be a very interesting interior space. So far I've only been able to see it by looking in the front door of the model, and it's not really a great view. But it's intriguing, and it's gotten my architect friend and music people and others, including the contractors, real interested in being a part of this project. So it's taken quite a while to put it all together, but it's now under construction, and the steel is in place. The big pinwheel has been set on top of the support posts, and the laminated wood frames are under construction at this point. And so pretty soon we'll be starting to see that roof go together.
Randy, for those who are familiar with the layout of Camp Lutherland, whereabouts on your property is this taking place or taking shape?
Well, if you are familiar with Lutherland and you walk out the west side of the dining hall between Rice Hall and the Education Building into the woods, you'll find some old growth, big oaks and so forth, and there's a nice clearing in there where we're putting this up. Some things about the building in particular: it's about 55 feet across. The size was picked because that's big enough to put the labyrinth from Chart into the floor.
We're going to get to showing that and talking a little bit more about the labyrinth a little later in the program.
Good.
Everybody didn't just jump on board with Randy's ideas right away. He is persistent, and he's an excellent teacher, and he's had to stick with it and bring some of the other people on board, at least as I've received the story. I don't think I'm telling it wrong, am I?
No. Okay. It's an odd idea, and so it did take a little while for people to...
But in addition to being roughly 55 feet square of clear open space because of this design, there's really no pillars inside interrupting that space. And then with the skylight on the top, what would be the dimensions of the skylight here, Randy?
6 feet on a side.
And then that provides, on the floor then, as I say, we'll talk about the labyrinth after a bit, but it's envisioned that there'll be wide use of it, that people could sit on the carpet, or they could sit on cushions, or chairs could be put in, so it'll be a highly flexible space. And I'm just excited to hear the acoustics in there, because I think they'll be rather remarkable the way the sound will mix in that.
Well, as you mentioned early on, the idea was a space for worship and music. Before the program, Randy, you were talking a little bit about where the idea originally began to germinate, with former activities director Lee Lindemann sponsoring or leading a music event at camp, or
it was folk music for use in worship. And another person that was attracted to putting that program together was Pastor Gilwald Koenig, who's another kind of deployed person from our synod. He's currently adjunct professor, I believe, at Gettysburg Seminary, and looking at small parishes and rural parishes. But he's a fine musician, plays all the instruments with strings, and he's been involved in Lutherland in the summertime, and this whole idea captured his imagination too. So the idea of having a place where we could do specialty music kinds of events, and where strings, acoustics would be good. There are a lot of places where you can do things with electronic and amplified music and that sort of thing, but the idea of having an acoustic space was of interest to him. And that's gradually broadened a, a great deal. Somebody else who's caught fire with this idea is Jim Cunningham. He is associated with an organization called Trinity Brass, and it's quite a number of brass musicians from all over western Pennsylvania, and a number of them happen to be teachers who have students who would be interested in a jazz camp. So that's one of the things that's appeared on the horizon.
We're going to have to take a short break just to allow a little bit of a promotion of some of our local congregations. We're going to come back and talk about potential uses and come back to the chart labyrinth again. Sorry to interrupt, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. With us today are Pastor Randy Gullickson, Executive Director at Camp Lutherland, and Mr. Frank Baker, a member of St. John's Lutheran Church in Katanning. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to come in and share the story with us today of this new project undertaken at Lutherland. Randy, before we so rudely interrupted you, we were talking about the interest that such a project draws from educators and musicians out there who see an opportunity emerging.
Well, one of the things that's on the horizon is the possibility of a jazz camp, a week of the summer where jazz teachers from around western Pennsylvania would come with their students, and it would probably be open to others. But that's one of those early ideas that will be materializing. There will be other ways to utilize the music aspect of it within our summer program and summer camps. For years and years and years, Pastor Bill Brewer has been doing a musical, an original musical at camp each summer. It's entirely possible that this will become the new home for the musical. I think it probably will. There are other things for which we would use this. One of the inspirational elements in shaping this was a picture I saw a few years ago about a global mission event, and some folks who, I don't remember the publication it was in, but it was a striking image of a group of people sitting on the floor on a map of the world with a cross in the center, and they had bowls full of sand filled with candles. And I was told later on that this was a global mission prayer event, and it had such a striking atmosphere that I thought when we put this together, it should be flexible enough to allow us to put that kind of an experience together. So I think one of the things that will be happening in there is a variety of different sort. I hate to use the word creative, but different kinds and concepts around the shape of liturgy and different ways that we can gather to worship. Frank already mentioned the flexibility of the room, and it's intended to be completely adaptable to anything that we can imagine, which is kind of fun to have that sort of space.
Well, it's interesting because I'm sure a lot of folks who think of Lutherland think of many marvelous outside worship spaces that have been very much a part of our lives as we've been at Camp Lutherland. But they've also probably experienced one of those times where in the midst of a downpour or a thunderstorm, because of the weather preventing someone from being able to be outside in one of those settings, it can really put a cramp in trying to have a meaningful worship. So these kinds of spaces certainly offer an alternative, but are not to replace some of the very wonderful outside experience.
Oh, not by any means. We've been always blessed with good weather for our Friday night closing worships and so forth. It's one of the reasons that we know that God loves us. But there have been those moments where remember your baptism was the cry as we all ran up the hill. And it'll be great to have a place that's more conducive to worship than an auditorium. And so we're looking forward to that.
And as you say, the variety of opportunities in this kind of a space really holds out a lot of promise as well. Frank, if we can turn back to you again, as you said, you approached Randy a while back about being willing to support.
Probably about maybe three years ago, something like that.
Oh, I think it's all of that.
Yeah, some sort of a new project. And of course, you're not new to Lutheran, and this wasn't the first time you've gotten involved in supporting a project at camp. You were sharing with us before the program an early experience whenever you think about Lutheran.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Remembering back with someone coming and holding up the vision of a church camp. Can you share a bit of that with us?
Yeah, the envisioning has been a very important part of Camp Lutherland from its inception and then all through its development. And yes, I remember as a rather small lad, we'd have father-son banquets at our church once a year. Bob Shaw would make the pancakes. They were so big they'd hang out over the plate, you know. But part of that memory was one time the program that we had when Dr. Laufer was our pastor was Dr. Elmer F. Rice, who was pastoring several churches near Katanning, came over and did a program, and he showed slides of fields and woods, and he says, we're going to build a church camp here. There wasn't anything developed there yet. And the passion and vision that he created, I mean, stuck with me because he carried through, and I understand went over and worked most weekends himself and painted and all. But that very much impressed me as a small boy. And then later on, I was one of the early campers there, and all of our children have camped there. Tracy was there a couple times, and he did the canoe camp coming down from Kinzu, and Douglas did the traditional, and then did rocket camp, and Kathy, who's now Lutheran pastor, by the way, did traditional camp, and then horse camp, and outpost, was it, over Moraine? She did a number of those. We even loaned our horse there one summer. I'm not sure it was more of a bane than a blessing because the poor thing got sick. But anyway, it's been a long association, and we've just been thrilled to be a part of it.
It's really neat, isn't it, when you get to see the personal effects in your own family and in your own congregation, when folks get involved in that kind of a ministry and bring some of that vitality and some of that creative energy back to the congregation. And when we begin to see those partnerships between different ministries, congregations, and camps,